The spirit of the wood boxes begin with selecting the unique boards that I'll be using, which means going through my stash to remind myself what I have. I've got this angle, and they're a little bit big for what I want for this. They also have a lot of cracking through the middle here. And on this one, this whole back half of it is cracked. So I think what I'm going to do is come off the front edge in a rectangular shape. It's also going to leave me this part over here I can probably use for the rails. On the front I've got this board. It's in two halves. That's going to give me the natural edge in between the drawers that I like to use. And I've got plenty of length here. I want something that's going to contrast with these lighter woods. So I went through my walnut stash, and this is the only board that is wide enough and long enough. It's got this nice figure in the middle. So I can use this part for the sides. You're really not going to see that very much. And this will be however much length I need coming from here. Will give me my top and my bottom. Now, normally I would just put a rail across like this and like this. But that's going to cover up my figure. So I'm thinking maybe I want a rail that follows this curve, and should it be symmetrical and come all the way back to here? That would be too long. So maybe it's going to be asymmetrical. At least on this is going to be the front. So maybe just on this front rail it will be curved, and the back rail would be straight, maybe. And the grain on here kind of has that swoosh to it, so that might work out. So I think we've got a plan. Let's start cutting stuff. First I want to do any resawing that I need to do, so I can let those boards rest for a while before milling them to final size. The maple slabs were really warped, and they were too wide for the joiner, so I had to clean up each pass with the hand plane. After a lot of planing, I was able to resaw them into 4 half-inch pieces, so I have a few of these for future projects, and enough thickness to allow for any warping. To make resawing the walnut easier on the bandsaw, I start on the table saw with a 7 1/4 inch blade because it has a narrow kerf. Right off of the saw, this side is pretty flat. It's got a little bit of a cup to it. And this side is not straight. It's about a 1/2 inch bow over the length of this. And you never know what you're going to get when you resaw. I'll set these aside for at least a few days before I do anything else with them and see what happens. It's been a couple weeks since these were resawed. I've cut what's going to be the top and bottom to rough length. These were going to be the sides. But they're cupped quite a bit. This end is not cupped as bad. Now long enough to be the sides. It's still going to be pretty thin though, because I need to have dados for the drawer runners. So what I'm thinking I'm going to do is double it up. And I can rip these in half, joint them on my 6-inch joiner, and get those flat, and then glue back together. And these ones I won't have to rip. So you won't see a glue joint on the outside. These will be on the inside. So now I'm going to get these flat, and to do that I'm going to use a sled through the planer and get this on here and get some wedges. So it doesn't rock anymore. if I'm gentle, should be able to get that pretty flat. The grain is all over the place in here, so I'm going to have to do most of it on the drum sander. It's not lost on me that I'm gluing back together the walnut that I resawed, but I needed to get the project moving forward before I was ready to commit to cutting that walnut board to length. The price of working without a definite plan is some wasted effort here and there. But it gave me an idea for a future project, which we'll get back to later. I'm using the Akita dovetail jig on the case and the drawers. The way this jig works is the guide fingers snap into a bar on 1/8 inch increments, so the spacing is adjustable but also repeatable. I'm looking for 17 inches from here, which is here. I don't know whether I want to favor to this side or this side. There's some nice figure down here, and it sort of matches over here. So maybe I just want to split the difference and pick up both of them. Before I start working out the drawers, I want to make sure I have the same dimension at both ends here because of the natural edge. Now the middle, this is sort of going diagonally through, and it's got this bump here. So I think to make the best use of the space, I want to think of these drawers as sort of two drawers next to each other, and one will be deeper than the other, and they'll just be attached to each other, and they'll move together. But that'll give you that extra depth over here, and maybe a little bit of extra depth over here, but probably not. Let's see. That's 5 over here. Maybe. So let's come down from here about here. The highest point here is about 6. So we'll start at 6 over here. So, does that make sense? Yeah, I think that makes sense. I'm laying out for the drawer runners, and I realize I've screwed up. In the beginning, these were going to be overlay. Then I switched that to being inset for a number of reasons. So I made this, the length of this, expecting 1/4 inch or more at the top and bottom, but my top and bottom ended up much thinner than that. So now I've got a bigger gap here than what I wanted. It's still fine the way it is, but with the Akita dovetail jig, I can set it up again exactly the same because the guide fingers snap in on 1/8 inch increments. So it's really not a big deal for me to cut 1/4 inch off one end of this and do the dovetails again. The only thing that changes with the setup would be the depth of the bit, and the bit is still set up in the router, so it's not a big deal. That took less than 10 minutes, and now it's much better. So I'm going to mark where the drawer runners are going to go. And this one tapers, so I need to go up high. I'm going to be insetting the drawers, so I want a rabbet around the front, and also on the back, for the back panel I'll need a rabbet. And normally with the dovetailed case, the piece with the tails, the rabbit cut can be a through cut. On the piece with the pins, it would have to be a stopped rabbit. But because my top and bottom are so thin, I can cheat and just glue a strip on the inside of here, which is going to help stiffen this. And the only rabbit cut I'm going to have to make is on the tails, which will be a through cut, which I can do on the table saw. I use the drum sander to get the fit of the drawer runners perfect, and then glue them in only at the front edge so the case can expand and contract. I waited until after the case was assembled to glue the strips to the top and bottom, since that makes aligning them really easy. Skipping over the simple drawer construction, the middle two drawers need to be two different heights in the same drawer. First, I find the transition point between the two heights and make the cuts on the table saw, cleaning up the corner with a chisel. This lower drawer is pretty straightforward because the bottom can run continuously through here with just a divider. The upper one is a problem though, because the bottom of this one has to be up here. So I can run a groove through here, that's no problem. But this one, if I ran a groove above the pin, it would have to stop here. But the pin is extra wide over here, so that would leave me with only very little height in the drawer itself. So what I'd like to do is do a rabbet on the bottom of here. I can't do it with a rabbiting bit in a handheld router because the base of the router would hit against here before I could get in here. I can't do it in the router table because I can't raise the bit high enough to get up here. I use a straight bit in the router table with the fence offset to support the stock and keep the bit inside the fence for safety. Rather than offsetting one side of the split fence, you might be tempted to put the stock between the fence and the bit, like this. Now you can do that, but you need to be very aware of what's happening here. You always want to be feeding the stock against the rotation of the bit. So when the fence is out here, you're cutting on this side of the bit, which is going this way. So you feed the stock this way. If I do this, now I'm cutting on this side, and this side of the bit is going this way. So I have to feed the stock this way. If you try to go this way, it's going to want to just grab the thing right out of your hand. I cut a dado for the middle dividers and cleaned it up with a hand plane. The divider for the upper drawer gets two grooves, and I only assemble the side where the bottom gets trapped to begin with, just to make life easier. To locate the grooves in the drawers for the slides, I work my way towards the middle, first from the bottom and then from the top. I make my measurements with the drawer front in place, since the drawers themselves are shorter. Then I finally get around to cutting the drawer fronts to their final length. I want to get the best grain match I can on these drawer fronts, and I've removed material when I cut them apart. So the best match on this face is not necessarily where the edges are lined up, especially towards this end. You see that this line isn't matching up anymore. This line isn't matching up. So if I shift this over a little bit, I can get a better match. Same with the lower drawer. Gluing on the drawer fronts for the bottom half is straightforward, since I can clamp them with the drawers in the case, working my way up from the bottom. I can't do that on the top half, so I use double-sided tape to temporarily hold the front in place, mark the location from the back, and then remove the tape and glue it on. To be honest, at this point, I was really tempted to just ditch the rails and the sides, because it was a pretty nice piece just the way it was. When roughing up the slabs for the sides, I tried to leave as much as possible intact, since I was hoping to use those offcuts for the rails. By the time I got the sides flat, I had a lot less thickness than I really wanted, but there wasn't really anything I could do about that. It became apparent that the offcuts were not going to work for the rails, so I decided I would do a lamination instead, since I had that on the brain from working on Bruce, and I could get the exact curve that I wanted, and still have the grain running through that curve for strength. You can see I did much of this work earlier in the build process, but I put it together here at the end for clarity. We'll get more into the laminating process on Bruce, so I'll just gloss over it here. To join the rails to the sides, I'm using dowels, since they're easy to locate, and it doesn't really need to be all that strong. First I drill holes in the rails, and then use dowel centers to mark the locations on the sides. A tack puller is handy for getting the centers out if they get stuck in there. I only have 3 of each size, so I'm using 2 different sizes. I do the finishing before attaching the sides, since it would be quite difficult to apply the finish in between the case and the sides. Let's just pretend the assembly went just fine. The dowels weren't a little too long, and one of the rails didn't pop off while I was pounding on it. I'm pretty happy with the results. I had to adapt to the walnut warping, and ended up with a glue joint showing in the tails. That gives me the idea, though, that I could laminate a contrasting species in between the two, and it would show through in those tails. Had I not gone through that otherwise wasted exercise of resawing the sides, that wouldn't have occurred to me. Going through the process with an open mind leads you to new ideas.